I am with Robert Hartman. I'm with the Evansville Wartime Museum, and Mr. Hartman is a World War II veteran, and he is going to tell us about his life today. Mr. Hartman, if you would, tell us your name and when and where you were born.
I'm Robert Hartman. Most people call me Bob. And I was born here in Evansville, Indiana, down on the west side at 1918 West Virginia. Now that's right in front of the St. Boniface Church and close to the Wabash Avenue. I was born there in 1925, a long time ago. I'm currently 97 years old, and I'm still doing artwork, and I'm retired, have been for 30 years. And I started out at St. Boniface, went to 8 years at St. Boniface grade school, and then I went to Wright's, where I had a terrific art teacher named Alice Zimmerman, and she taught me the airbrush and quite a few things about art that I didn't know. And while I was at Wright's in 1943, I guess it was 1942, my uncle Albert came to visit my mother, and he said they were hiring people to go to work at a place that's going to be named Republic Aviation and build airplanes. So he told my mother that they had room for a stock boy. So my junior year at Wright's, I spent a half a day at school and the other half working. I had to get permission from Neil Pierce, the principal, but he told me that I had enough credits that I could graduate if I took 2 classes in English in the morning. So at 11 o'clock I was finished with school, and I stopped by the Wright's cafeteria, and I'd pick up a sandwich, and I'd walk down the hill to Barker Avenue, and catch the bus on Barker Avenue and ride it all the way downtown, and from downtown out to Oak Hill Cemetery. And I would walk a half a block to Highway 41, and I would thumb out the highway. There was no bus at that time. So I was thumbing, and a guy picked me up, and he told me that his name was Victor Pixie, and that he was a test pilot for Republic Aviation. And he told me that if I was on that corner at 12 o'clock, noon, every day, he would pick me up and give me a lift to out the highway. So I got a ride out, and at that time, Swanson and Nunn was just a wood shack over by the railroad tracks, and the field was full of holes and ditches that the Newman Plumbing Company was digging ditches. And the plumbing company got off at 7 o'clock, and they had an old school bus without any windows, and the all the ditch diggers rode that school bus to the west side. So I rode with them, and I learned real early not to sit at the back of the bus. The ditch diggers all chewed tobacco, so I sat behind the bus driver, and I rode from Highway 41 and Ferris Avenue all the way to the west side, and I got home about 7 o'clock in the evening, and my mother always had a warm meal ready for me. And I had about 2 hours to study for school, and then I graduated. And you want me to go on telling more? Or?
Yeah, whatever you want to tell us.
Well, I took some classes at the Armory and passed some tests, and they said I was eligible to join the Air Corps. So I did that, and Thanksgiving Day, 1943, I left to join the Air Corps. We didn't have a family car, so my mother and dad and my brother and sister and we all walked down Franklin Street to Fulton Avenue, then down Fulton Avenue to the train station. And I was by myself, train ride over to Cincinnati, and I joined the Air Corps at Fort Thomas, Kentucky in 1943. And I was there for about a week. I got all kinds of shots and clothing. I got Air Corps clothing, and they put me on a train to go to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. That's just south of St. Louis. And Jefferson Barracks is an old World War I barracks. The only good part of it was the kitchen, which was a brick building, and the office building, which was brick. The rest of Jefferson Barracks was tents. There was about 100 tents, and there was 6 guys to each tent. And this was during the winter of 1943, and it was cold, and the tents didn't work too well. It was all smoky, and they would get us up at 4:30 in the morning, and they'd have roll call, and then we'd have to march about a mile through the woods to the Jefferson Barracks cafeteria. So we did get a warm meal, and that was at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. And one morning we walked 20 miles down to Moss Hollow, which was a rifle range, and we all fired guns down there, and then next day walked back another 20 miles. And they gave us a lot of tests at Jefferson Barracks, and I didn't especially want to fly. I joined the Air Corps hoping I could go to mechanic school, because I'd been working as a mechanic with Republic Aviation here in Evansville, and I wanted to go to school, but I had to I had to change direction because they had me scheduled for cadets, and I was to go to Waco, Texas for flying. But since I didn't want to fly, they put me on a train and went down to Biloxi, Mississippi. And Biloxi had a big mechanic school, and I was happy. And I was down there about a month, and one day they called us and told us that they didn't need mechanics anymore, and they needed something else, but they wouldn't tell us what. So quite a few of the guys were mad about it and wouldn't take any more of the tests. And they sent them, there was 30 of them, they sent them to England, and they made them stevedores for D-Day. Now that's people that load and unload ships. Well, the other 30 of us that took the test, and we all passed, we were sent to Scottsfield, Illinois, which is across the river from St. Louis. And I was happy with that. And I even got to come home one time to see my family. And went back, and I didn't have any trouble with school because I already knew how to type. And I was put in a group of 18 technicians and 2 officers. And we had 2 radar men in our group, but at that time they didn't call it radar, they called it GCA, which was ground control approach. Anyway, we had 2 of them, we had 2 mechanics, we had two of everything that you need to work airport. I was doing control tower work and cryptograph work. Now, cryptograph is coding, and they put us in a group, and after some traveling here in the United States, I wound up in Rahway, New Jersey, and they put us on the Queen Mary, which is a big English ship. There was 18,000 paratroopers in our group of 60. And we all crossed the ocean in 5 days. But it was springtime, and the Queen Mary is big, but it went up and down. Mm-hmm. And I had to laugh because when we were in New Jersey, they were training us to jump off of a ship into the water. Well, it's 90 feet from the top of the Queen Mary to the water level, and that would be one hell of a splash. But they were training for every ship, I guess. And going across the ocean took 5 days, and 3 of them was stormy, and we all got sick, and we weren't, none of us, very good sailors. But we arrived in the Firth of Clyde in Scotland, and that area is far enough from Germany that they couldn't bomb it. And now the Germans did bomb London quite often, but they never did bomb Scotland there at the Firth of Clyde. So we got off the boat at Glasgow onto trains, And overnight we went through Scotland and England down close to London at a field called Bovingdon. And from there we went to a town called Hanley and to a little town called Stone. And Stone had about 15 houses and a grass runway. So it wasn't much of an airfield. We were there only about a week. And then they gave us a bunch of winter clothes, and because it was getting cold again. And they told us that we'd be leaving, and we got on an airplane there at Bovingdon, and we flew across the channel to Paris. And I knew we were going to Paris because I could see the Eiffel Tower in a distance. We landed at Arley Field, and it was kind of hectic because they had been bombed and there was a lot of holes right next to the runway. But we landed safely, and they transferred us to the 133rd Air Corps headquarters, which was on the Seine River. They just opened up because Paris hadn't been completely taken yet. And but I don't know how much you want me to tell you.
We want to hear whatever you want to tell us. So while you were in, how long were you in Paris?
Well, I'll tell you about the time we went AWOL.
Okay.
I was there at Paris, and we were told to stay in these. They had two empty houses on the Seine River that used to belong to some Jewish people, and the 30 of us were put in those two houses. They were empty, so we slept on the floor. But anyway, we set up our bunk, and we were waiting for orders to go to Germany. And but they told us that we'd be here all night and leave in the morning. Well, one of the neighbors there told us that if we catch the train that ran right in back of where we were staying, it would go into Paris at Austerlitz station. And he said, if you're at Austerlitz station at 11 o'clock, you can come right back and get off here at, it was called Ablon, A-B-L-O-N. And so my buddy Bob Price and I decided we were going to see Paris. And the rest of the guys were just sitting around wasting time. And Bob and I went into Paris, and we were in a tunnel, and I looked up and I saw a sign that says the next stop is Notre Dame Cathedral. So we got off the train and we went up to the top of the ground, and we came up right in front of Notre Dame. So they were taking people through, so we just got in line. And Paris never charged soldiers for anything. We went into Notre Dame Cathedral, and we went through a museum like next to it, and we went through a park, and at 11 o'clock we were back at the Austerlitz station. We got on the train for Avalon, but when we got to Avalon, I told Bob, I said, I think we're in trouble. I said, I don't see any soldiers anywhere. And he said, I don't either. So we went back to the house where our barracks bag was. And it was all empty except Price and Hartman. And the minute we got in the house, why, this buck sergeant came over and he said, where you guys been? And we told him we'd been to Paris. But we said, we weren't supposed to leave till tomorrow. He said, well, things changed. And he said, you guys are in trouble. He said, I guess you know you went AWOL. Well, we knew it. But he said, you stay here for the night. He says, be ready to go at 4:30 tomorrow morning. Well, we slept with all our clothes on, and we were ready. And at 4:30, he came to the door and he said, Price, he said, there's a truck out in front that's going to take you to Arley Field. But he said, Hartman, he said, you're supposed to go to Germany. And he said, your outfit is at a big park on the other side of Paris. And I didn't know what they were going to do with me. So he said, I'll talk to the major. So the major came over and he said, have you had breakfast yet? And I said, no, I haven't had anything. And he said, are you hungry? And I said, yes, sir. He said, come with me. So we went to this house. It was a pretty place. It's headquarters, 133rd AACS. That's where he lives. And he said, I'll have him fix you some breakfast. So I went in the kitchen and sat at the table, and there was a lady and a man, both Frenchmen, and I don't speak French. They probably didn't speak English, but they knew what ham and eggs was. So the the major asked me, he said, do you like ham and eggs? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you want toast? Yes, sir. You want some juice, orange juice? Yes, sir. So, man, I had a big breakfast. And then he said, he said, my Volkswagen is sitting out in front. And he said, get your barracks bag. So I did. And he had his chauffeur to take my barracks bag and put it on the back of this Volkswagen. There was a tire on the back of the Volkswagen, and he set my barracks bag on top of that tire. And he said, Hartman, he said, you sit in the back, and then the chauffeur and the major sat up front, and we drove, I guess, about 6 or 8 miles across Paris until we got to a big park. And when we got to the park, there was a big U-drive. We had just pulled in, and the trucks were all mounted in this driveway around this big park. And he said, do you see your outfit? And I said, yeah, that's my group right over there. So he had the chauffeur to drive this Volkswagen over there, and he stopped right next to this big truck, and all my buddies were sitting up there on top of this truck looking at me, and That's Hartman. And the chauffeur got out and took my barracks bag, and he tossed it up to my buddies, and the major told me, he says, "Don't go AWOL anymore." And I said, "No, sir." And he said he didn't have time to fill out the papers or anything, so I lucked out that time. But I guess for a good 6 months after that, I got messages, and all my friends wanted to know how me and my chauffeur were getting along. But that was before I made the trip to Germany. And so I'm telling all this. Do you need any?
No, yeah, that's all interesting. And so then from Paris you went into Germany. From Paris you headed to Germany.
Yeah, we crossed. Well, it was kind of hairy. The Bulge had just. Do you remember the Bulge?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was 20,000 Germans, and they had all their equipment, and they weren't very far from from France, and we were crossing northern France, headed for Germany, and I guess at one time we were within about 10 miles of the Bulge, but we didn't know it at the time, but the Germans ran out of gas. But we had this convoy of 5 trucks and 2 jeeps, and we were crossing northern France. And the first night out, it was really cold, and we saw a school, an abandoned school, grade school. So we pulled in there because the wind was really strong. And we slept with all our clothes on. And the next morning I was wondering why it was so cold, but when I looked up there wasn't any roof on this school. But that was the first night out, but then we went on south through Dusseldorf and Stuttgart and a whole lot of German towns. And that's my mailman. Nice guy. My mailman just came and brought me some more magazines and bills and stuff. Anyway, that was before we crossed the Rhine River and went into Germany. And I think I told you about that. We were at Giebelstadt in Germany, at the airfield there, and that was when the war ended. I didn't get to go home right away because I was one of the youngest ones, and they let the older guys go home first that had families. So actually that was a nice vacation because I had a furlough time coming up, and with 4 other guys and a Jeep, we went down to Switzerland, and we went in at Mulhouse, France, into Switzerland, drove into Lucerne and Lucerne, and at that time the United Nations building was in Switzerland, and we got to go in there and look around and test the electronic equipment. Had a lot of phones, and if you wanted to speak English, you punched the English button. Anyway, I spent a week in Switzerland, and we went up to Mount Rigi, and we stayed at some small hotels, and we bought watches. I bought a watch for my brother because I knew I was going to be going home, and I had some perfume for my sister, and I had a rosary for my mother, and for my dad I got him an expensive pipe, and so I had something for everybody. And we were at Wiesbaden, Germany, and at that time, after the war, we were living in a commercial building. It was actually a doctor's office. There were 3 or 4 doctors in there, and it had a big iron fence around it, and we were living there and selling cigarettes. Eisenhower told us that we could sell anything that belonged to us, and I never did smoke, so I had 2 cartons of cigarettes every week. We could get them at the PX at 65 cents, and I was selling them for $20. And so I sent the money home, and my mother banked it for me. When I got home, I bought a brand new Chevrolet. So, well, my trip back home wasn't very interesting. It took 15 days to get on a victory ship that went up and down. One day didn't gain anything. We went through the same place in New Jersey, then back to Indianapolis, and from Indianapolis home. So I've been here in Evansville since then. My wife and I took 7 bus trips all over the United States until she got cancer. She got cancer when she was 55, and I retired in 1968, I think it was, and she died, and I've been living here by myself ever since, and I was lucky that I had some income all the time, and we had 4 children, 1 son, 3 daughters. They all graduated from college, and we had 15 grandchildren and quite a few more great-grandchildren. And that seems to be the story. I'm 97 and in fairly good health. And that's about it, unless you've got some questions.
Well, just one more thing. From all the life experiences that you've had, if you could give young people today advice, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, they have to get an education. You can't do anything if you don't have a good education. I would tell them not to smoke and to stay away from drugs. I've told my great-grandchildren that, and I think they all understand. And children nowadays are much smarter. They've got the advantage of having television and good schools, and as long as they behave themselves, they'll do good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I have 8 pictures here that I drew over the years, and this is it started out. Yeah. It started out in Evansville back in the 1800s. Got their cotton from the Mississippi Delta. Most of the cotton comes from down around Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. And these boats brought the cotton up here because the rivers didn't have the 9 feet of draft that they have now. Some of those steamboats could navigate on about 3 feet of water. So they brought cotton to Evansville. We had a cotton manufacturing plant down on St. Joseph Avenue on the west side. It's part of the Me Johnson property now. This was at Mesker Park.
The old carousel, I remember that.
My dad had taken many jobs during the Depression, and he was a painter out at Mesker Park. And at 12 o'clock, the guy that ran the merry-go-round went to lunch. So he asked my dad if he would run the merry-go-round from 12 to 1 o'clock. So that's when the Hartmans rode the merry-go-round. This ship was built back in the 1930s, and they had Regis monkeys that they brought in from Cincinnati, and a lot of the people from Evansville really enjoyed watching them. This mill was on Pennsylvania Street, which is now part of the expressway. I don't know the name of the mill, but you could get free corn cobs there. And my mother and dad used corn cobs mixed with coal. And the cobs were free, but coal was kind of expensive. And Nancy, could I get a glass of water?
Sure.
This is May Johnson Terminal.
Now, is that down where the shipyard was?
No, this is there on the river.
Right,
Well, yes, it was right next to the shipyard.
okay.
In fact, that May Johnson Terminal was probably the reason that we had a shipyard, because they brought in steel. And this, I believe most of the pagoda is still there.
Yep.
Now this is one of my favorites.
The P-47 Thunderbolt.
That's right.
And,
That's
and you worked on those when you were working at Republic Aviation.
right. I worked a whole year on that before I went into the service. And I saw, in Europe, I saw many P-47s. Now, they were designed for a high-level escort above 35,000 feet. But they really didn't need them for that, and they used them for ground-level bombing, and they're the ones that tore up all the railroad yards in Europe. And I used to see them all the time. I could recognize them by the shape of their wing. And this is the shipyard, and being from the west side, we had thousands of people from Kentucky and Illinois and everywhere that descended on the west side, and they built they built 171 LSTs down there on Ohio Street, and they were used on D-Day on Omaha Beach. They were used in the South Pacific. They were used all over. And we have one station down on the riverfront, and they were designed for tanks. And you can put two rows of tanks. I think you can haul five or 10 tanks on one LST, and it's really interesting. And it's here in Evansville, Indiana, at the riverfront. Well, that's completes my pictures.
All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we end your interview?
Yeah, there's a book right there to your, no, the one on the stand. Yeah, about 6 years ago, I wrote a book for my grandkids mainly, and it's for young children, 3 to 5 years old, and I've sold some of them here in Evansville and Henderson and all the small towns, and I also sold some on Amazon. I'm not sure if they're still on Amazon or not. I didn't push it because I didn't need the money, and it took a lot of time. But it's a book for children that at 3 to 5 they don't read or write. So it's mainly for yes or no.
Yeah, cool.
Now children understand what yes and they know what no means. So that's how the book is written.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. It's well, this is children. I learned from my grandchildren that whenever they draw a house, they'll put the chimney crooked.
Mm.
They always do that. And when they draw people, they put their eyes way up on top of their head. Well, your eyes are actually halfway, but they'll put their eyes way up here. And anyway, this something I did published it about 6 years ago, I guess.
Very nice.
And it's I was looking for something to do, and I have a studio in my basement, and my grandkids took over the studio, and I have many pictures that they have drawn for Grandpa, and I'm real happy that at least one of my grandchildren is an artist, and she started out with this book, and she drew everyone in the book, and she went on to grade school, and now she just started college, and I'm talking about Abigail, and Abby is 19 or 20, real pretty girl. She's going to be an artist, and she lives in Ogden, Utah, and she's going to Utah State University, and she's going to be an art teacher, and she'll be a good one because she has already won some contests, and besides that, she's a good tennis player.
Yeah, cool.
But,
She had a good teacher.
yeah, so I was happy that at least one of my grandchildren, but several of them are pretty good at art. Most of them have some kind of talent, and I've always pushed them to try different things.
Sure.
And I've been an artist all my life, and I had 30 years with Whirlpool, and I enjoyed it. And I made a lot of cartoons. I should have taken some cartoon lessons when I was younger, but I don't know that they had them, anybody offered them. But when I was at Whirlpool, there was always somebody getting a promotion, and we were having a party, and they wanted to sign something, so I would make them a card and put a cartoon on the front, and then everybody in engineering would sign it, and they would give them a gift of some kind. And when I retired, I counted 82 times that I made cartoons.
Cool.
And a lot of the guys thanked me for them, and some of the women said that they framed the pictures, the cartoons.
Yeah.
So I probably got cartoons all over Evansville.
Nice.
But that was something that I hadn't planned on. I didn't. I don't think there was any cartoon teachers in this area, but that's the way it happened, and they needed cards, so I made them.
Yeah, cool.
And I'm still doing some artwork, and it's always been a good living.
Oh yeah.
And I live here on Bayard Park Drive, and I still go to church on Sunday at Christ the King Church. I have many friends there, and the kids want me to stay here because it's handy, and so I'm hoping we have a Thanksgiving together. I'm not sure how many more I'll have, but you never know. I have a pacemaker, and the nurse at the hospital told me that it had a 10-year battery in it, so I don't think I'll be 105 when I run out.
Well, hopefully so.
But anyway, so far things have worked pretty good.
Yeah.
And I've been real happy here in my retirement. And I thank you for the request.
Well, thank you. We sure appreciate it.
Okay.